Sometimes, the hardest thing to face is not a bitter Wyoming winter or a long day of hard work. It is the memory of a heart that you broke yourself, and the person you left behind in the cold. The wind whistled around the little wooden church, pulling at the shawls and coat collars of the people gathered outside. It was autumn in the Wyoming Territory, and the air was getting cold. Inside the church, a social was happening. People were happy to be together, sharing food and talking after a long week of work. Daniel stood near the back wall, holding a cup of cider. He was a tall man who worked on his ranch, and his hands were rough from hard work. He liked these gatherings, but he often stayed quiet, just watching. Then he saw her. Across the room, helping to set out a pie, was Abigail. Daniel felt his heart give a hard thump, like a spooked horse. He had not seen her in 5 years. Not since the day she had said no to him. 5 years ago, Daniel had been younger and his feelings were big. He had liked Abigail very much. He thought she was kind and smart and beautiful. One evening, after a prayer meeting, he had asked her if he could court her properly. Courting meant spending time together to see if God meant for them to marry. But Abigail had looked scared. She had said no. She said she was not ready for the hard life of a rancher's wife. Soon after, she moved away to live with family in another state. Daniel's feelings were very hurt. He felt like a door had been slammed shut in his heart. Over time, the hurt became a quiet weight he carried everywhere. And now she was back. He had heard a rumor that she had returned to Pine Ridge to care for her old aunt who was sick. But hearing it and seeing her were two very different things. She looked older, a little tired, but still had the same gentle eyes. Abigail felt someone looking at her and glanced up. When she saw Daniel, her smile faded. She felt a sharp pinch of guilt in her stomach. She had thought about him often over the years. She had been young and foolish and afraid of commitment. Her fear had made her say no to a good man. She had prayed many times for God to forgive her, and she had hoped that maybe, one day, she could apologize to Daniel. She took a small step toward him, her hands twisting in her apron. "Hello, Daniel," she said softly. Daniel looked at her. His face showed no anger, but it showed no friendliness either. It was like a flat, still lake. He simply nodded his head. "Abigail," he said in a low voice. Then he turned around, put his cup down on a table, and walked right out of the church into the cold evening air. Abigail stood frozen. His quiet leaving hurt more than if he had shouted. It seemed the hurt from the past was a wall too high to climb over. The happy noise of the people around her felt far away. She had hoped for a chance, a small sign that things could be better. But all she felt was the cold from the door he had left through. She closed her eyes and sent a quiet prayer to God. She asked for peace for her heart, and for Daniel's heart too, if it was still hurting. She would not force her apology on him. She would wait and see what God's plan would be. The deep snows of winter slowly melted away, replaced by the gentle rains of spring. The world outside began to wake up. Green shoots pushed through the damp earth, and the trees showed tiny new leaves. Inside her aunt's house, Abigail tried to focus on her sewing, but her thoughts often wandered to the quiet rancher with the sad eyes. She saw Daniel in town sometimes, but he was always polite and distant, tipping his hat before moving on. She continued to pray for him, and for a chance to heal the old wound, trusting that God was in control. One Sunday after the church service, Pastor John made an announcement. The town needed a new schoolhouse. The old one was too small and let in the cold wind. He asked for volunteers to help build it. Many hands would make the work light, he said. It was a chance for the community to come together for a good cause. The next morning, Abigail arrived at the building site. She had offered to bring lunch for the workers and help where she could. She carried a large basket of bread and cheese. To her surprise, she saw Daniel already there, his sleeves rolled up, helping to lift a heavy wooden beam into place with some other men. Her heart beat a little faster. The work began. Men sawed wood and hammered nails. Women brought food and water and helped stack smaller pieces of lumber. At first, Abigail and Daniel carefully avoided each other. They worked on opposite sides of the new building. But as the days turned into weeks, they could not help but be near one another. One afternoon, a little boy named Samuel, who was fetching nails for the men, tripped over a pile of wood scraps. He fell hard and cried out, a sharp sound that cut through the noise of hammers. Both Daniel and Abigail turned at the same time and rushed to the boy's side. Daniel got there first, his strong hands gently checking the boy's leg. Abigail knelt right beside him, her voice soft as she comforted Samuel, telling him he was brave. For a moment, their hands touched as they both reached to help the child stand. They looked at each other, and in that shared concern for a hurt child, the icy wall between them seemed to crack just a little. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Abigail found herself alone by the water bucket, getting a drink. Daniel was there, washing the dust from his hands. It was the first time they had been truly alone since the church social. Abigail's heart was pounding. She knew this might be her only chance. She took a deep breath and turned to him. "Daniel," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I need to say I am sorry. I was wrong all those years ago. I was young and I was scared. My fear made me say no to you, and that was not fair. I have been sorry for a long time." Daniel was quiet for a moment, looking down at his hands. He had not expected her to say this. He had carried his hurt for so long, it felt like a part of him. He finally looked at her. "I was angry for a long time," he admitted. "My pride was hurt. I thought I was not good enough. I held onto that anger. It was a heavy burden." They talked a little more, their words careful but honest. It was not a long conversation, but it was a start. The next Sunday, Pastor John preached about forgiveness. He spoke about how holding on to hurt only makes the heart sick, but forgiveness sets everyone free. Daniel listened closely. He realized that to truly forgive Abigail, he had to let his old hurt go and give it to God. The following week, Daniel walked to Abigail's aunt's house after church. He asked Abigail if, with her aunt as a chaperone, she would like to take a walk with him. Abigail's face lit up with a hopeful smile, and she said yes. Their walks became a regular event. They would talk about their days, their hopes, and their faith. They discovered that the young people they had been were gone, and in their place were two older, wiser people who understood life a little better. Daniel's quiet nature warmed around Abigail's kindness. Abigail's fear was replaced by a growing trust and respect for the good, steady man Daniel had become. Their courtship was proper and respectful, always with a family member nearby. They shared simple meals and long conversations. The seeds of friendship, watered by honesty and forgiveness, began to grow into something strong and beautiful. Spring turned into early summer, and the new schoolhouse was nearly finished. So was the new beginning for Daniel and Abigail. The Wyoming summer arrived in full glory, painting the world in bright colors. Wildflowers dotted the meadows around Pine Ridge, and the sun warmed the earth. The new schoolhouse stood finished and proud, a symbol of what the community could achieve together. For Daniel and Abigail, the season mirrored the warmth growing in their own hearts. Their walks after church were the highlight of each week, filled with easy conversation and shared smiles. One evening, as the fireflies began to blink like tiny stars in the fading light, Daniel knew what he had to do. His love for Abigail had grown from a tiny seed of forgiveness into a strong, steady tree. He wanted to build a life with her. He went to her aunt's house, his heart beating fast but his mind clear. He respectfully asked her aunt for permission to speak with Abigail alone on the porch, and her aunt, with a knowing smile, agreed to watch from the parlor window. Daniel stood before Abigail, the setting sun making her face glow. He took her hands in his own hands rough from work but gentle with her. "Abigail," he began, his voice deep and sincere. "These past months have been the happiest I have known. Getting to know you again has been a gift from God. You have shown me kindness, patience, and a strong faith. My love for you is real and true. I cannot imagine my future without you in it." He took a small breath, looking into her eyes. "Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Will you marry me? Tears of joy welled up in Abigail's eyes. She had prayed for this moment, hoping that God would bless their second chance. Her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. "Yes, Daniel," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." A smile broke across Daniel's face, a true and full smile that reached his eyes. He had never looked so happy. The news spread through Pine Ridge quickly, and everyone was delighted. The couple who had found their way back to each other was an answer to many prayers. They were married on a perfect summer Saturday. The little church was filled with sunlight and the sweet smell of wildflowers gathered by the children of the town. Abigail wore a simple but beautiful dress she had sewn herself. Daniel stood tall and proud at the front next to Pastor John. Pastor John spoke to them about the true meaning of love. "Love is patient, love is kind," he said. "It is not proud. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres." Your story is a beautiful example of this. God has given you a second chance, a chance to build a love that will last a lifetime. They said their vows before God and all their friends, promising to love and care for each other in good times and bad. After the ceremony, the whole community celebrated with a picnic on the church grounds, sharing food and laughter. After the celebration, Daniel brought Abigail to his ranch. He led her over the threshold of the small, sturdy house he had built with his own hands. It was clean and warm, filled with the golden light of the setting sun. This was their home. They were husband and wife, beginning their new life together in the way God intended. Married life was not always easy. There were challenges. One night, a fierce summer storm blew a hole in the roof. Daniel worked in the rain and wind to patch it while Abigail held a lantern steady, her prayers whispering on the wind. Another time, a cow was having a very difficult time giving birth to her calf. Daniel stayed in the barn all night, and Abigail stayed with him, bringing him warm coffee and praying quietly for the animals. They faced each problem together, side by side. They prayed for strength and wisdom, and they supported each other without complaint. Their love was growing deeper, rooted in shared faith and mutual respect. Then, one morning a few months after their wedding, Abigail realized something that filled her with a new, trembling joy. She quietly shared her suspicion with Daniel, her cheeks turning pink. A doctor from town came to visit and confirmed their wonderful news. Abigail was going to have a baby. They held each other close, their hearts overflowing with gratitude. They saw this new life as the most precious blessing from God, the next beautiful chapter in the story He was writing for them. They prayed together, thanking God for His goodness and asking for His protection over their growing family. Winter wrapped the ranch in a blanket of quiet white, but inside the little house, there was warmth and happy preparation. Abigail's sewing basket was filled with tiny clothes, and Daniel had carefully carved a small rattle from a piece of soft wood. They spent the long evenings talking quietly by the fire, dreaming of the child who would soon join them. Their prayers were filled with thanks and a hopeful trust in God's plan. When the first signs of spring began to show, the time came. One morning, as the sun was just starting to rise, Abigail knew their baby was ready to be born. Daniel quickly rode to town to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Miller, a kind woman from church who helped with births. The house became a place of quiet activity. Daniel waited anxiously in the main room, his Bible open on his lap, but the words blurred as he listened for any sound from the other room. He prayed without stopping, asking God to keep both Abigail and their baby safe. After what felt like a very long time, the door opened. Mrs. Miller came out, her face tired but smiling. "You can come in now, Daniel," she said softly. Daniel walked into the room. Abigail was lying in bed, looking tired, but her face was glowing with a happiness he had never seen before. In her arms, wrapped snugly in a soft blanket, was their baby. The baby had a round, pink face and a tiny tuft of dark hair. "Daniel," Abigail whispered. "Meet your son." Carefully, as if handling the most fragile treasure, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed and took his son into his arms. A feeling of love so powerful it stole his breath washed over him. He looked at Abigail, his eyes wet with tears of joy. "He is perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. You are both perfect. They named their son Joseph, a name that means, God will add. They chose it because they felt God had added this incredible joy and purpose to their lives. The final scene took place a year later. The summer sun was warm on their backs. Daniel and Abigail were sitting on an old quilt under the big oak tree near their house. Joseph, now a chubby 1-year-old with a happy giggle, was holding onto his father's fingers for balance. With wobbly legs and a determined look on his little face, he took one step, then two, letting go and tumbling into his mother's waiting arms. They all laughed together, a sound of pure joy that mixed with the rustling leaves. Daniel put his arm around Abigail, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. They watched their son play with the blades of grass. God took a story that started with such a cold winter, Abigail said softly. And he gave us a forever harvest of love. Daniel nodded. The hard times made our love stronger. And with God in the middle of it, I know we can face anything else that comes our way. They sat there together, a family. Their happily ever after was not a life without any problems, but a life filled with faith, love, and the promise of facing every tomorrow together, with God leading their way. If you enjoyed this story of faith, love, and second chances, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more heartfelt tales from the past.